Hello everyone, welcome to another part of ASEAN Pacific episode. In this show today, we are going to talk about the newly released US Indo-Pacific strategy. My guest for today is Amruta Amruta Karambelkar is a research associate with Vivekananda International Foundation. Her research focuses on Indo-Pacific with specific reference to Quad and the Indian Ocean. She is also pursuing doctorate from Jawaharlal Nehru University on the subject of naval modernization in Southeast Asia. She has previously worked with the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies and interned with the Indian Council of World Affairs. Amruta holds MPhil from Jawaharlal Nehru University and MA in Political Science from the University of Pune. She has written extensively and presented on her subject at various national and international conferences. Welcome, Amruta. Thank you for joining my show today. Amruta, could you hear
Thank
me
you.
now?
Yes, thank you, Lokman, and good evening to you and all your listeners.
Thank you. Thank
It's a
you very
pleasure
much.
to be speaking to you.
Amruta, now the last week the United States released it is the new Indo-Pacific strategy. So, what did you see in the recent published the document Indo-Pacific strategy? What is the new? What is the repeated? What kind of change we can talk about from the Trump administration to the Biden? What will be your take?
See, if we compare this particular document to what we have seen coming out from the US in the last 2, 3 years, this document is far more detailed and far more forthright, if I may say. So the documents that were published earlier in 2009, notably, they were generalistic. So they laid out, what are the American interests or how, what are the security threats, and there used to be a reference to China and North Korea. But what we see here is a consolidation of the American strategy. What is it that they actually want to do? So far we were just hearing there is no strategy and how it is more vague, and there were bits and pieces happening here and there which we were putting our minds to come up with a common picture. But what we see in this document is a fairly clear idea of what the Americans want to do. Now, coming back to how it was under Trump, if you remember last year, just before the end of Trump presidency, he there was a so-called declassified document that they published on the Indo-Pacific, which was very uncanny because you don't declassify documents before a certain time. But this was just done. And when we went through the document, we realized that there was nothing as such classified about it. It was pretty much straightforward. And the only underlying factor was that how China is seen as a bigger threat or the biggest threat in the American administration. So this is what we see in the current document as well. What I found very interesting about it is that if you it's the way the document begins. Okay, the so-called the action plan, it says this is what the American commitment to the region is, which is what they're trying to say, that we are very much here. And until Biden came to power, there were questions raised about American commitment to the region, specifically from Southeast Asia. But the title says there is promise. Another very interesting factor was, if you look at strategies of European countries or even France, they have a certain way they justify their Indo-Pacific interest. Okay, it goes by whether they have territories, how much trade they do, how much of people they have, how much of that, so on and so forth. And this is exactly what I find the Americans saying it, which I've never not seen before. They would usually talk about how this is an important area, but how specifically this area matters to the United States has been articulated right now very much. Another very interesting fact, I'm sorry, I'm repeating the word interestingly, so, but is, if you've seen in somewhere second, they talk about how they have been historically involved in this region. And historically does not mean just between the wars or since the Second World War. They're going back, way back when, during the colonial period, when how the Americans had their commercial interest into this region. So they're going back far. I've not seen that sort of a statement coming into American documents before. So we see that. And why is it that we see these changes? Because if you've seen the rhetoric from Chinese side, they have always said, this is like, it's like the home turf, which is where extra regional power should not have a play. So this is the way Americans justifying how they are not extra regional powers at all. They have always been here for various reasons, now right from colonial era. So this is what I found very interesting.
So the document makes repeated references to the need for collective efforts and or collective action. And there is a many debate on the internet, on the social media platform. Could this be seen as the US losing its global supremacy or no in a position to need restore a new alliance system?
This is the answer is both a yes and a no to this. Okay, now um, there are a lot of efforts at collective. Now, one way you can argue that okay, maybe the US is losing its preeminence, which is why it wants to have a lot more partnerships in its, to sort of mitigate it. One way to look at it is how we have seen these changes during, or these sort of tendencies during Trump administration policy as well. So if you see during Trump's era, there was a lot of rhetoric about how allies and partners have to, step up to the table, do their part of the job, and how America is not going to, do the entire thing on your own. You see the exact same elements in Biden's policy, but with a lot of sophistication and a lot of diplomatic niceties, if I may say. So they also want their allies and partners to share the burden, because now this global policeman role is no longer. I think the domestic environment in the US is not likely to support too much of interventionist American policy, whatever little I know about them. So it could be that could be one reason. Then it's also, I mean, financially looking at the whole area, why from an American perspective, why should they be footing the bill? So why not allies do that sort of burden sharing? So you see several references made to how this is going to be done. So America, if I have to just, summarize the American approach in this regard in one sentence, I will say they're trying to be a facilitator in chief. What I mean by that is that there are existing networks in the region, there are newer networks that are going to be there. The Americans are saying that they are going to strengthen these existing networks, in increase some set up an interface between these various networks where they interact more and more with each other. If you look at Quad, for instance, okay, these four countries have come together, they are doing certain areas. Then within Quad also you have these trilaterals between India Japan Australia, India Japan, or US Japan Australia, and India France Japan, and so on and so forth. Also, we have seen the latest defense pact between Australia and Republic of Korea, Australia and Japan, uh, something between India and Philippines. US is increasing collaboration with Indonesia in security. So this is where it is facilitating. So you see that wherever there is technology that needs to be provided, or weaponry or defense sales, the US is easing those sales. Okay, and it's also allowing, or may I say, enabling regional players to do more. So AUKUS, for instance, okay, we see Australia in an unprecedented role. I mean, no one would have thought this. Okay, just came out of the blue that such a pact will be signed, and see how it elevates Australia's geopolitical status. I mean, once in a while, 5 years ago, you would have never spoken or taken Australia in from that perspective that we'll be able to do something militarily. But look at this pact. Americans have facilitated it, and it is going to change the naval balance of power in the region. And again, you have brought in UK in the same breath. That is one way. Now, so this is how these networks will flourish, and we will see more and more these sort of things. So the US will be there, but you will not see US intervening into every theater or every sort of small areas. It's just regional countries have to manage it on their own, because they also have to take responsibility, or share the burden. So this is what you will see. So there'll be more expectations also from the allies and partners that you do, and I think a lot of countries will be more than happy to do that. Now, I'm coming back to Australia. After AUKUS was announced, you should see the public reaction in Australia. It was very positive. They were happy. I mean, general public, that Australia's, the larger role in the region and how it is going to enhance your status. So these factors will play out, which is why countries will also be more than happy to do that role. I mean, let's not forget that until very recently, it was the American security umbrella for last 75 years, which enabled regional peace, and which was a sort of, if I have to say this very objectively and not as an Indian, but this was, a luxury of sorts, where under the American security umbrella, the region was stable. The countries could focus on the economic growth, and they did not need to focus or worry so much about enhancing the defense budget, or diverting resources from developmental needs into security matters. So that was there, but now I think the Americans do not want to do it anymore, and hence there is this part of making it more network. Another way, if I can still go on this question, is that this is also a way to gain legitimacy to the whole idea of the Indo-Pacific. If you would recall, when the Indo-Pacific framework was promulgated, the very first few months, and if you've seen the Chinese reactions, or even reactions from Southeast Asia, it was always seen as an American initiative. That Indo-Pacific is an American idea to contain China, and how other regional countries are not going to be on board. And Southeast Asia was not using Indo-Pacific terminology for a while; they were still sticking to Asia Pacific. So when you delegate these security partnerships to everyone in the region in various ways, through minilaterals, through networks, through trilaterals, etc., you involve more and more people under the same ideological construct. So everybody will be involved in Indo-Pacific. Everybody will have their Indo-Pacific strategy. So it's not just one US or just the four Quad countries that are going to do that. You will have, say, perhaps Vietnam who will start using the word Indo-Pacific. You will have New Zealand, you will have Indonesia, Thailand, so these, maybe Sri Lanka or Bangladesh. So once these countries start using Indo-Pacific nomenclature, it lends a legitimacy that, look, this is not just an American initiative as the Chinese would want it to project, but the fact that this is a ubiquitous or a legitimate concept for the region.
Amruta, when we look at the new released document in the public strategy, is there too much reference in the new document central role of the ASEAN or the geographical importance of Southeast Asia? What you can say about this? Too much mention in the Southeast Asia.
On the contrary, I would not say there's too much mention of ASEAN. Okay, because there are these I mean, there are references in a way. Other countries have been addressed for the way they have spoken about Korea or Australia. Is how they have spoken about ASEAN as well. Now, ASEAN centrality is nothing new in this document. I mean, the Americans have been saying about upholding ASEAN centrality. Indians have always supported Indian ASEAN centrality. All the Indo-Pacific documents have more or less accorded importance to ASEAN, and ASEAN's centrality to it. Um, so I won't say that there is an extra emphasis or there is any extra space given to ASEAN. Yes, I mean, it's the usual. I didn't see anything new about it. But if I can elaborate on what ASEAN's role is going to be on this, if you permit, is that see, ASEAN has always been demanding a concrete economic strategy from the US. Okay, there has always been this strategic dichotomy where China is a major economic partner and US is the security provider, and this arrangement worked very well for Southeast Asia since the end of the Second World War, and even better since the end of Cold War. But despite these repeated requests or diplomatic signaling of wanting to have an economic strategy from the US, it didn't come during Trump administration. So there was some hope from region that maybe, as with Biden administration and his different approach, maybe you might see some economic strategy coming into place, because it was hope. 1 year since Biden administration has come into office, we did not see any economic initiatives. If you recall, when General Austin visited Southeast Asia in the later half of the second year, his signaling was very clear that uh, there may not be an economic program. I mean, the Americans are clearly playing on their strength in this region, which is security. Defense and security has always been their forte, and this is where they would play it out. And the way I read it at that time, it seemed like, the ball is in Southeast Asia's court, the ASEAN's court. What is it that they want? Is it your security that is important to you, or is it your trade or economic dependency on China? So it's up to them to decide which way they want to go. And so we didn't see any revival of CTPPP or any new pact or anything of that sort in the last 1 year. Now, what you see in this document is there's a paragraph on economic growth and prosperity, not economic growth, but prosperity. And how are the Americans looking at it? This is where it's completely brilliant, if I may say. When we understand, when ASEAN talks about economic issues, we usually understand it in typical trade relations, that manufacturing and old school of way of doing things. The Americans are instead talking about digital economy and 4II, which is the future. Four industrial revolution is already here, but they are saying their perspective is from a futuristic perspective. But they're not talking about trade or manufacturing or increasing trade, etc. They are saying that they will enhance capacities of regional states to be resilient, or to face or to participate equally in digital economy and critical technologies and cyber and so on and so forth. So you won't see any major trade power, because one, this is again where the US has edge technology, and we've seen, I mean, in front of us, we've seen how technology has changed our economy completely. I mean, it's just Internet of Things, and how everything is digitized. So the focus of the US will be somewhere like this. It's not that old school trade and FTAs that's going to come. That said, the document also states that, specifically when it comes to ASEAN, that how America is the biggest investor in ASEAN compared to all the other three major partners of ASEAN. So be it China, be it Japan, be it Korea, how Americans have invested a lot more into ASEAN, which is sort of came as a revelation, because usually what we keep hearing is how we get an impression that China is the biggest investor, or the biggest trading partner, and US must be severely lagging behind. But the document says contrary otherwise, that how they have already, they are just their investments and their uh, trade, etc., is far higher than even what China might have with ASEAN. So it's like a statement saying, look, we're already there. We've done what we have to do. We are your biggest investor, your trade and exports, etc. But now we're moving into another domain, which is, let's look into the future. And that's a Mastercard, if I may say.
Now, Amruta, let's come to the India. I think India is the number one country that much mentioned about it. I think about the 12th times mentioned the name of India. In this document, what is the new for India?
I mean, like the way I said about ASEAN, it's not that India, I mean, has been given any special referencing, because before I read the document, I had also read in a lot of here and there on Twitter or something like that, how India is like, given a lot of emphasis. I thought maybe there was too much space given to India in the whole document, but it's not. It's one paragraph mainly, and everywhere else. So India is also one of these partners that US has. So just as they've mentioned Australia or South Korea, New Zealand, your European partners, your ASEAN, India is also mentioned there. India's then what I found interesting is that how India has been specifically characterized there, as India has been somewhere. They've mentioned the conflict with China. They have mentioned how India is an important partner of the Quad, but also how they are India is mainly seen as concerned with Indian Ocean and South Asia. So how that is a primary area of India, and this is what Indian policy has always been. So our first area of concern will be Indian Ocean, and so Indian Ocean and Indian Ocean region for that matter. And there was always some sort of I won't say hesitancy, but we knew our limitations to go farther east. And when I say we go, I mean in a very a military sense, or our resources are not to an extent which it could sustain a perpetual Indian engagement further in the Pacific, or somewhere there. So, in a way, so those expectations about India are pipe. I don't know if a pipe down is the right way, but those are more realistic. That this is Indian Ocean and South Asia. Although they've also mentioned how India has connections to Southeast Asia as well. So there is an acknowledgement of India's interest in Southeast Asia, and how otherwise also, I mean, besides geography, India's participation in Quad and in building norms, etc. So India has its due role that has been specifically put up. So as an Indian, I think this is a fair assessment that I see, but nothing in a way that the way media had made out there is a lot of emphasis. Of course, I mean, there is a recognition that it is time to invest into India, which is what the Indian leadership has been. That's been the diplomatic effort, that it's time that countries come and start investing in India, because India is a democracy. India has, I mean, all the attributes of democracy. So unlike in a way when the West invested into China, okay, may help China grow, and look what has become of it. So the Indian leadership argues that you should rather now invest into India, because India is democracy, and the problems that we see with China wouldn't come. I mean, I think that effort has been successful, and we see that reflected in this document.
Okay, my last question will be, Amruta, what is new in the document other than the military aspects? Because when we come to the Indo-Pacific strategy, that automatically we remind the AUKUS and the Quad, and then following everything, mostly the military cover the more space. But now in this document, do you think more weight is given to the areas more than the military, for example, the civil areas? Like climate change,
Yes,
how we can say the people-to-people connection, and etc.
I agree. The earlier documents always had a very straightforward military uh, military aspect to it. Here, there is a lot of, like I said, when I was speaking about ASEAN, the emphasis on economy and how they are thinking futuristic about economy, about digital economy and cyberspace and critical technology. So this is completely new, and it's like stepping up the ante. That this is, until now, it's not that they are following the rhetoric set by China, or following what the Chinese, rolling the car, walking on the carpet that Chinese have rolled out, but instead they've done their own thing now, that this is what we are going to do, and now it's going to be up to China how it reacts and how it deals with these issues. So that's one big change. Then climate change, of course. I mean, there's no big surprise. We've seen President Biden talk about climate change very, very passionately, and we knew this was going to be emphasized. So that again, we see about climate change. Um, I mean, of course, I personally have a lot of, I'm little pessimistic about this whole climate change agenda being pushed this way, because I mean, if one has to be really concerned about climate change, we don't see any concrete steps being taken from countries that pollute or contributors to the greatest pollution. I mean, that and somewhere the burden might just shift to developing world. And when when countries are dependent on coal, or be it on other resources, so it might just put an undue burden. And if climate change is going to be, if there are going to be technologies about clean climate technologies, who's going to invest? So where's that money going to come from? Because I'm not sure if whether India or even Southeast Asian countries can, at this stage of development, afford to invest into clean technologies. I mean, we already have natural resources. It's cheap. It's so that is there. Um, what I find a little worrisome about this document is, you've seen a lot of emphasis on normative matters like democracy, and that's in a way given, because that's the only way you would want to score against China, that China is a communist country, and US and the others are democracy. Now Indo-Pacific is a concert of democracy, so to say. But then there are these paragraphs that talk about how the US, when it comes to will support, say, civil rights group, or free press, and civil movements, etc., etc. Now, we by now all of us know how these things work, right? I mean, we live in Asia. We've seen how vested interests usually play out amongst these, causing instability through various protests, etc. By now the world is aware of this, and it is precisely uh, this Americans handbook that countries had started getting closer to China, preferred China, because the loans came with no strings attached. There was no question about any whether you have human rights record, or these things didn't matter to the Chinese. You were pumping in money, you ask for it, they give it to you, that fashion. But here there is so much of emphasis on democracy, and democracy in a very typical classic liberal, or a Western understanding of democracy. So I have my doubts how particularly Southeast Asian countries are going to look up to it, how they will receive it. Because one way, I mean, if we are talking very candidly, and as academics we are allowed to speak freely, but so how will it not tantamount to interference in domestic affairs? How will it not amount to subversion? I mean, where is the line? And this has come this has been articulated in the document straightforward, that this was, I mean, the Trump administration would not have bothered so much about it in the way Biden administration does. So this is one area where I don't know how this is going to go, because in the Indo-Pacific we know how we are. We know how, in terms of, say, your democratic index, many countries will fare, because the criteria is set in a certain fashion that obviously Southeast Asian or South Asian countries will always fail there. So what does this amount to? Again, this again Western standards, and just when, so being a skeptic, I would say, just in the time when we were speaking about the rise of Asian century, is this another way where the Anglo-Saxon order is returning to Asia? And we've had historical precedences how that worked the previous time. So that part is something I would be cautious about.
Amruta, we have a few questions, I think. Let me, what is our questions? Look, we said, how will the US build a resilient alliance system in an environment where many countries' interests in the Indo-Pacific are based on establishing economic and trade relations with China?
Right. So, like I've said, there is that. um See, the US is communicating that it is still the strongest power in the country, and so they do not have to succumb to these pressures that are coming from the region. That you have to create yourself as an alternative to China. They are saying we are already an alternative. This is the way our system is, and it's up to you whether you want to be on board or not. And again, their economic initiatives are again talking about cyber and digital economy, and etc. So that sort of trade pact is not there. So I'm sure China will again continue to play on its strength, They are, I mean, they have, so the China and Southeast Asia economic ties are profound. I mean, you can't just wish them away. So this will continue, and even if you talk about digital economy and all these things, not all countries are prepared for it, right? I mean, we are still developing. We are still old school manufacturing, and these systems are going on. So uh, that dependency on China, or there is enough space for China to retain or even increase its influence. The challenge will be on the US, how they are going to be able to and sort of um, to tackle this, so to say, because it's not going to be easy. It's certainly not going to be easy.
Yes, but because I think that the questions goes to the point we should mention, especially the Southeast Asian, maybe even Northeast Asian countries totally, when even from the small business they are depend on China. They import almost everything from China. When US come to the competition and the rivalry with China, it should provide an alternative. So how US will fill up this gap? What kind of alternative does US can
Entirely,
provide?
entirely. So one way I can guess is maybe shifting more of these supply chains elsewhere. So little bit goes to Vietnam. Let's say something comes to India. Then India has its own policy of Atmanirbhar Bharat now. So helping, sort of wean away that dependency on China elsewhere into Southeast Asia or India. But it's not going to be easy. I mean, it looks very easy to paper, but let's say the Japan, US is one of the closest allies. I don't imagine Japanese businesses going out of China. I mean, that dependency you just can't wish away with. Australia, for that matter. So right now, it might be putting up a brave resistance against Chinese onslaught, but there is so much of trade and restrictions will the Australian public opinion eventually sustain this hawkish stance against China, and see what's happening when, so with all the trade, what may I say, the trade war between Australia and China, the American exports to China have continued. They are at an all-time high. Be it your wines and other Chinese Americans have coal also, if I'm not mistaken. So it's extremely difficult because to what extent you would want to put up that fight? I mean, your trade is extremely important. Territory and sovereignty has its own definitely and non-negotiable position in Indian in national strategies. But economic growth is, I mean, Southeast Asia is so critical for them. It's critical for India. So I don't see, and this strategy has no concrete examples of how they are going to address this issue. We'll have to maybe wait and watch what measures are going to come afterwards.
Just another point I would like to mention. I think, Amruta, when we come to the comparison of the investment or trade or economy, compare China with US. China has the geographical proximity. This is an advantage for China when the trade is make it everything easy to the import, and how we can say, the China has able to distribution your it is goods very easily. Thinking about the Southeast Asian countries, inside one day they can send some goods and make a trade. But when we look at the Europe, there is a big huge distance between the Europe or the US to the region.
Yes, that's what I mean. Geographical advantage is certainly there, and since most of the Southeast Asian economies are still uh, raw, they export raw produce or agricultural produce. So this is where geographical proximity matters. If you recall, way back in 2012 or 13, when there was a moratorium on Cavendish bananas from the Philippines, when suddenly your
Yes.
exports, you can't send it, and you can't just be shipping it to another country. I mean, though US that time said they would import, but then sending something which requires a day or two of shipping time to sending it across the world with agriculture produce, you can't do that. So yes, I mean, there is always the possibility of trade being weaponized, and that's always going to be there, which is why we see. a lot of caution coming from Southeast Asia. I mean, the Americans might say whatever they want to say, but those that are residing here with China is your geography. You can't change your neighbors, right? So that factor is always going to be there. You can't. I mean, Chinese. I mean, we are the ones we are sharing border with them compared to other Quad members. So our concerns are also there. So you can't wish this away. And these challenges from regional perspective will always remain. And they're grave. They're very serious.
Yes, even Australia has an experience of wine to trade to China.
Correct. And like I said, interestingly, so while this happened, the American wine exports to China have increased. So Australian traders have had that loss, but Americans have gained out of it. I read it somewhere. Very interesting.
Yes. Okay, let me bring next question, Charlotte. Martin, does the USA have the economic and human resource to compete with China in investments outside the military areas in Indo-Pacific region? Yes, this is an issue also.
This is yes. So in a way, um, I'd say a straight no, because if it was, then we wouldn't have been talking about this question if this issue was not there. So that is why you've seen US relying a lot more on networks. And now you have this B3G, bring back better world, done with G7 or US's Blue Dot network. So all these initiatives for human resources and economic initiatives are all network centric. It's not singularly US led mechanism that you see, and these are all network settings. So there is somewhere an acknowledgement that they do not have that sort of capacities to invest. I mean, even look at Europe and Chinese dependency, it's massive. uh, so that's why you've seen even Europeans taking a very cautious line with respect to China, because they are also reliant on investments from China. These are all, we have to understand, these are all countries with aging populations, more or less. So they just they have to their reliance on external investment is only going to increase. So that dependency is in which this is where we should see these digital revolutions in that context, where you're just changing the nature of the economy. So, and this is where the US or the Western world has a great advantage, and they are likely to play on those grounds. So, because they do not have these material capacities, maybe to compete with China, which is why they are changing the game. They are playing on their strength, and steering the global economy in that direction.
But I think especially the point of human resource is very important, and this is another advantage of China, given it is the population size. We cannot compare to the Chinese labor power with the US or the European expats. For example, when the China invest an infrastructure in Southeast Asia or South Asia country, the China can send 10,000 labor power. Inside a few months, they can complete the huge infrastructure project. But how the US and the EU human resource can compete with this advantage?
They simply cannot. Okay, and the answer to that is a very systemic answer. China has state-owned enterprises, which is your public centers that are going. So if your country says you have to go and build a bridge in so and so country, they will go and do it because they are not driven by profit. I mean, they're not worried about profit or whether this is a good business model. Whereas the US or European countries, you don't have that sort of, I mean, you have private sector, you don't have that kind of public sector existing. So your private sector will only go and invest where they see profit, where there is a return on investment, that which is that they will do it. But China's infrastructure is strategic, so, and because they have the typical economic model where it is trade driven, the laborers, their laws, etc. So these issues that face democratic countries or countries with a huge private sector, these questions don't face China. So that's why, I mean, you simply cannot match it. They might make all these announcement, B3G and BOT and etc. But hand to hand infrastructure, you cannot match it. So where the what these countries would do is that, again, capacity building in this sector also. So we've come to our experience says that a lot of these small countries which are caught in debt trap diplomacy, a lot of them do not have the capacity to assess these loans or the legalities of it. So I'm assuming that the Indo-Pacific strategies would look into enhancing capacities of countries to assess these projects, to understand what this work and what it does not work. So this is how they will try to counter. But a bridge for a bridge, I don't see that happening.
Amruta, from this point, since our debate is about a question about the human resource in this aspect, what kind of alternative India can provide as a strongest partnership with the US or the European alliance system? Uh, India has also the huge human resource. What kind of alternative India can provide?
See, although we have human resources, but we also have a strong private sector. So unlike China, we can't be telling our big infrastructure companies to, just go start building a bridge somewhere or build a train somewhere. They won't listen. I mean, naturally, and that's how it should be. But so, in the way I have alluded to previously, this is how these strategies might work. And if these countries decide that, somewhere we have to push our public sector this way towards strategic projects, if leadership agrees to that, then we might see some projects happening that way. In India today still has a few. We still have some public sector companies, or if the government decides to lend strategic support to Indian businesses overseas, then you might see some kind of initiatives. Although the long-standing Indian policy has been that we also work on our strength, which is human resources, but and capacity building. So when we say infrastructure or ties, we are looking at more human to human contact, and education and English language courses, and STEM, etc., collaboration in those areas. Although recently India has also started in the in Afghanistan we constructed the parliament. In Maldives we have made constructions recently. So we are doing whatever is it that we can do as per our capacity. So this is where it is happening, but not on the. I mean, I have to be honest about it. Not to the scale which Chinese can do. I mean, we have to be realistic. Nobody can match that scale. We can do a little bit here and there, and we can maybe explain ourselves better why our models are better than the Chinese model, and again improve capacities. Maybe figure out ways to an easier credit to developing countries, something of that sort, like the Japanese do through their ODA. So these are the ways I can see it. But an exact replication of Chinese model, no. I mean, even if India has this human resources, no.
Okay, let me. That is this question. Weber Johnson, will the US-led Russia-related alliance in Indo-Pacific bring Russia and China even closer, especially in the context of Ukraine and the Taiwan fronts?
In a short term, yes, we already see that happening in Ukraine, and in the next for the next 5-10 years, we would expect a lot of coordination between or understanding. But uh, the US China alliance is also a marriage of convenience. So this is also because, I mean, right now they are coming together under with the common motive of working against the West or the NATO, but they also have their own internal differences. So China's growing influence in Russia's Far East or Central Asia is something I'm not. I'm afraid Russia can't live with that. I mean, it has its own concerns with respect to China. So this will go on to a certain extent where the interests are congruent, but eventually we might see some splits coming up. And Lokman, if you just give me 10 seconds, I'll just put on my laptop on charger. You could take the next question till
Yes,
then.
yes,
Yeah.
please. Yes.
Yes, please. Hi,
Hi, Amruta.
extremely sorry,
Yes,
extremely sorry.
yes, we stay in this. Let me, yes, let me bring the new question. China said the Indo-Pacific strategy of the United States is the resurgence of the Cold War mentality and bloc politics. There has nothing new, even less feature. What do you think of this topic, Lucy Garnier?
It's a sort of
This
yes
is
to this answer.
more of a China response, I think,
Yes.
to the new realized Indo-Pacific strategy.
I mean, that's how Chinese see it, because if you look at it very objectively, you do see that, you know, Quad or some other countries are coming under US umbrella and China on the other side. So you do see those elements there where countries will be forced to make that sort of a choice. Although this document says that, we will ensure that countries don't have to make those choices. But interestingly, again, this document says how the competition between US and China will not affect transnational issues. So something like climate change or other transnational matters, those will remain unaffected with even with China. So US will be, become more responsible to towards region. But there is no guarantee that the competition will not affect countries individually. Or let's say if I have a policy of hedging or if I'm maintaining an equidistance, the US policy paper says that it is not their responsibility to ensure that you are able to still exercise that choice. The US's role will be to manage this competition in a way that your larger regional or systemic issues do not come to affect. So that's all that they have said. So you will eventually start seeing more and more this choices of countries becoming narrower. So in that way, Cold War, I mean, yes, in a way, it's sort of a given that we are in a stage where you do have two countries facing each other, and slowly and gradually these systems are shaping up. So that is there. That's the fear.
Okay, let me. Yes, Michelle. Considering China's growing economic and military capability, do you think the U.S. actions will match to their rhetoric when it comes to the being to on China?
Militarily, the US still has edge. Okay, the Chinese Navy might have huge numbers and they're dishing out warships like at an unbelievable rate each year. But wars are not just going to be, hard, hull to hull. You've seen there are so many revolutions happening in military affairs. You have missile systems, you have space-based weapons that are coming up, hypersonics. So uh, the technology is truly, truly changing, and the Americans have an edge over it. So, if it really comes, if the war really comes to it, it might be fought in a very different fashion. So, I wouldn't worry about a military strategy. I mean, look, in military strategies, you always have a way around it. If your opponent has greater numbers, you might have adopt a strategy accordingly. If your uh, enemy has better capabilities, you will adopt your strategy accordingly. So I don't see. I mean, of course, the way, at least in the South China Sea, in the first island chain, of course, the cost of a U.S. attack is extremely expensive. I don't think they would ever think about uh, doing the old school amphibious landings of that sort. Which is why, if you see AUKUS, that's the plan, because if you see, China has obviously has a range of missile defense systems set up around the island chains, and the only thing that can beat that is a nuclear powered submarine or a nuclear submarine. So you see that sort of reaction already taking place. Of course, it is not the US that is actually doing it, but a network security where its allies and partners are sharing the burden. So there are these things are going to happen, and again, the US has so many allies and partners versus China that is entirely on your own. So let us say, even if you say China has 700 ships, and let us hypothetically let us combine the navies of even the four Quad countries. Who has the superiority? That answers.
Yes,
I think the economic part, I think I've fairly answered, so I won't repeat myself.
another thing, despite although the US has military superiority in military technology of the missile defense, but a war, including alliance countries, a kind of war with China would make terrible, even not the region, even international politics, because given the China's economic size and the population size, that is why I think the question asking about the actions, this is about theory and practice, the theoretically, how can turn to the practical if when China come to the US come to the invade the China, or in case of if China try to invade the Taiwan, what will be China's action, US actions?
So I'll begin with the last question first. With respect to Taiwan, there is the US has strategic ambiguity, and they have maintained that. Although this document has mentioned how they will come to, they're going to enhance China's defense, sorry, Taiwan's defensive capacities while sticking to their one China policy. So this ambiguity is very much there. But we have to understand, did we ever see Russia attacking the US or US directly attacking Russia? No, the Cold War was played out in Europe. And this is how this will be. So the war between the two countries, if will be on a third country, they're not going to fight, attack each other per se. Okay, that said, the amount of, unlike the previous instances of world wars, you have so much of interdependence between the US and China. So the appetite for attacking China or an actual war, I see it is very, very minimal. Also, because the Chinese do not want to have an actual war. By now, we have deciphered Chinese strategy fairly well. South China Sea, or what's happening with our border in the Himalayas, is that they're going to limit themselves to the gray zone, what we call the gray zone tactics, and not take it to actual war, because they wouldn't win it, and they wouldn't want to enter into a war. So it's going to be these small skirmishes, small sort of friction points that will keep on happening, multiple points. But that massive breaking point, I think that even the Chinese wouldn't want to reach that stage.
Yes, that is why also there is a debate among the U.S. scholars and the decision makers. Someone said the U.S. doesn't have enough power to fighting in two theater, especially according related to the Ukraine crisis. There is a debate: does the U.S. has the power to fighting in two front? Someone say the U.S. yes has enough power and should commitment to its allies, even the Ukraine not ally. But someone said no, U.S. should only focus on the Asia and the China, and Asia is the priority for the United States. There is also a debate. I would like to mention.
I mean, if you again take numbers to numbers, if you compare the growth in Chinese Navy versus the American naval, numbers are going down. But numbers is not the only way you look at military strategy. There are several ways you can, and of course, you will always have critiques that raise these issues genuinely, and also there is also, if I can be honest, there is also a certain agenda behind these rhetorics, because when you amplify threat, the idea is that you get more budget to create that atmosphere where your defense budget can be enhanced. So these things also sort of overplaying China threat that we are not adequate, so that there is more budget allocated to national security or Department of Defense and towards modernization. This is what these this is how also this has to be seen. But alliance part and two front war, that's why, I mean, even if there is irrespective of whether Americans have capacity or not, we would not really know unless there's an actual war. But technologies are changing, and then when you have these sort of strong networks that you are building, then it just becomes different. Like, let's just imagine, okay, China is on its own. China and Russia, let's say, are friends. There is an entire NATO is there in Crimea. If it comes to the Indo-Pacific, you do have Australia, you have Japan, so you have these networks. So uh, I wouldn't say it will be entirely difficult for the Americans to fight in two. I mean, who knows? We can only build scenarios at this point in time. But the concrete answer is, I mean, I'm one of those people who still feel that, I mean, I don't really buy into the American decline argument as yet. So, wars, I mean, the warfare is changing rapidly, okay, and technique of war otherwise also. And you have now have non-kinetic means of fighting warfare. I mean, look at COVID-19. Just release, I mean, hypothetically, you can release a virus and you can bring the world to standstill without firing a shot. So we have to understand national security from a much wider perspective now.
Okay, that's the next. Anna Johnson, India has been mentioned more than any other country. Is this much reference to India related to India's population size? I think I am not alone that the new document mentioned India a lot.
Yeah, yeah, I've mentioned that, but I mean, it's not nothing to do with population or size. I mean, the US-India relationship has deepened over the course of last 20 years. I mean, it is phenomenal. It has reached to depth and width that we would have never imagined. So India is an important partner, and population and size, not as much, but our strategic position, our the size of our military, our economic potential are all these factors that play into India-US relations.
Last question. Compared to Trump area Indo-Pacific strategies with Biden's Indo-Pacific strategy, can it be said that there has been a relative softening towards China in the Biden area?
The softening is only in language, not in essence. The essence is exactly the same. They have recognized China as a strong threat, and they are dealing with it. Though what we are seeing in Crimea raises the question as to why. I mean, it's completely unanticipated, whereas Trump wanted to reconcile with Russia. Sort of he knew where his priorities lie, which is tackling China and put everything else on the back burner. But under Biden, we do see that is it there or is it not there? So I think there is still a little bit of ambiguity. And if I can connect it to the previous question, that maybe the Americans have the capacity to engage in two fronts. So this is the strategy document has come right when Crimea conflict is still the issue is still going on, right? So the strategy, the commitment to Indo-Pacific has come at around the same time as well as Crimea. So maybe uh, not so softening, but maybe they can tackle both. Maybe just in order of priority right now, because I mean that's how one can argue.
In this document, I think there is no mention to about the Chinese Communist Party or CCP like the previous Indo-Pacific strategy during the Trump administration.
There isn't, but I mean, see, you don't in that's the beauty of diplomacy. You don't have to be direct. You can say in as many or as few words. So when they're talking about democracy or a different system, there isn't. They're clearly alluding to the Chinese system, and when you speak about China, and there are these how China's actions are taking place. So in China, you really can't separate the party and state, and I mean everything is just one. So if you're dealing with China, you're talking about the CCP as well, and you've seen so many references made to democracy and democratic ideals and etc. So that's a signaling towards the CCP. But I
I,
mean, if specifically asking about democratizing China and all that, of course, I mean, only a fool would put that on paper.
yes, I think also I saw a lot of the comment on the social media. Someone said that the previous Indo-Pacific strategy, especially during the Trump era, are more hawkish, but these documents are liberalized during the since Joe Biden come to power.
Yes, I mean, Joe Biden is an astute diplomat. I mean, reading this document, it's a masterpiece in diplomacy. The way it's written, I thoroughly enjoyed reading it from an academic point of view, and it's beautifully written, and so much to read between the lines. So that sophistication, that finesse was, what evident from Biden's side from day one. We knew it's going to be a lot more sophisticated, and yes, so Trump's brazenness is gone. So uh, yes.
Okay, I think I have last question, Amruta. Yes, Fraser Peterson. Despite being rejected every time by the United States, Indo-Pacific strategies are consistently referred to the US strategies for China. What are Amruta's comments?
I quite don't get this question. Rejected by USA, the strategies are considered to us. Okay, I get this. So the
Yes,
rejection is by,
would you like to say that the Indo-Pacific strategy are the US-China strategy?
in a way, yes, but even if other countries are coming up with this Indo-Pacific strategies, because there is a common interest, right? I mean, in this region, there is the interest in not letting China dominate this space entirely, and or maybe change rules of engagement, change rules of navigation, and this is where the countries that have Indo-Pacific strategies, they have a common interest in ensuring that this does not happen, which is why which is why they seem to be on the same bus when it comes to the Indo-Pacific. So of course, I mean they will. I mean, who's going to say we are anti-China? Who's going to put it on paper? Nobody's going to do that. But that's how diplomacy works. You don't have to say what you have to do. Your actions and everything conveys what it has to be there. I mean, just imagine if you say tomorrow all these countries say, "Oh, we're entirely anti-China." How will that backfire? So you don't
I
have to
think
exactly be
I,
forthright about your intentions.
I think ultimately it can be said this Indo-Pacific strategy document issued because of China. I think when we go to the
Entirely, absolutely,
20 years
absolutely.
ago, before China's rising, there is no US
Absolutely,
Pacific strategy.
absolutely, absolutely. There are absolutely no doubts about that. I mean, of course, there is the way you're justifying. There is so much of trade. There is so much of interconnectedness. Now, the interconnectedness has been since centuries, right? But why we're talking about it now is because the rise of China, the way it is trying, what it has done in the South China Sea or elsewhere, how it is trying to, the so-called strings of pearls, which now a lot of people dismiss, but it's BRI, it's financial debt traps, etc. So these are the ways that are going to threaten countries in this region and their national interests. So which is why, yes, I mean, China is very much a part of it, but you don't have to see it. It's there. And let's say, I mean, if had it not been for China, as let's just deconstruct this. If had it not been for China's aggression or for Chinese negative actions, would countries have come up with Indo-Pacific strategies? No, everything was going on fine. Everybody has invested. There is a lot of money to make. They wouldn't have, but we've seen a balance of power altering in the region, which is why this is a response.
Okay, Amruta, I also come to end of my audience's question. Thank you very much for this great discussion and joining me today.
Thank you very much, Lokman. I thoroughly enjoyed, and I apologize again for that little bit of glitch I've had in between. So
There
I
is,
hope your readers have also enjoyed, and I was able to satisfactorily answer your questions, and hope to join you sometime again.
thank you very much,
Thank you
Amruta.
very much. Thank you. Good
Thank
night.
you. Good night. Also, thank you for my audiences. Thank you for your questions. And please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Share the video with your friends, networks, like the video, and please waiting for upcoming shows. Thank you.